Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. My name is Steph, and I'm here to present another brilliant episode aimed at providing advice and insight to writers and readers. And as always, this is coming to you from the National Centre for Writing, right at home in the beautiful and sunny Norwich UNESCO City of Literature. For today's episode, I am pleased to introduce you to novelists Benjamin Johncock and Megan Bradbury, who are going to dive deep into their writing lives and offer advice to emerging novelists and writers of all kinds. Benjamin Johncock is an award-winning novelist, short story writer and journalist. His debut novel, The Last Pilot, won the Authors Club Best First Novel Award, was shortlisted for the East Anglian Book of the Year, selected for Brave New Reads, and was one of the Observer's Hidden Gems of 2016. Megan Bradbury is a British writer, tutor and mentor and author of the critically acclaimed novel Everyone is Watching. Described as a beating heart of a novel by Ali Smith and kaleidoscopic by Eimear McBride, the novel was longlisted for the Rathbones Folio Prize and was listed as one of The Guardian's best books of 2016. We love Benjamin and Megan. They're brilliant writers and people, and we're lucky to have them as tutors on our upcoming online creative writing courses, which begin in late September. So if you're looking for a structured period of development for your writing and you feel you would benefit from regular one-to-one feedback from Benjamin or Megan, do check out their courses at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk/academy and click on the online tutored course button. Be quick because spaces fill up fast. Right, back to the meat and bones of this podcast. Join Benjamin and Megan as they discuss the writing tools, programmes and learning opportunities available for emerging writers and the benefits of continued learning. They also touch on the early influences in their writing, how their routines have changed over time, and the challenge of separating your creative life from your domestic life. And now, let's tune in to Benjamin Johncock and Megan Bradbury in conversation.
Hello, Ben.
Hello, Megan.
Hello, Ben. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good.
It's nice to see you here.
Yes, and you.
In this lovely studio.
It's very nice, and it's dark, so we're out of the sun, which is, I think, most requirement for most writers is to be in a dark room.
Some people like a view. Some people like to be distracted.
It's nice to have the view there as an option, but like not sort of compelled to look at it, because I quite like a blank wall personally.
Do you?
Yeah.
I find I need a bit of perspective.
I say I like to look at a wall, but I do often, this is so very kind of intricacies of writing, it must be very dull, but actually this is quite interesting, that when you're writing and you do have to kind of sit up and look away, and there's a perspective thing, and I don't know, there's something about how that triggers your imagination, which is quite interesting. And I've recently, we'll get into this when we're talking a bit more about how we write and what we do when we're actually writing. I've started to handwrite a lot of things, and I've noticed that there's something incredibly pleasurable about the physicality of that, which I think most people would recognise. But the actual act of kind of looking down and up from the page as a kind of a reset, as you'd imagine, I've been watching a lot of the Olympics, but as you'd imagine a swimmer does when they come up for air and then they go back down again. And I've noticed actually the more I've done that over the past few weeks, there's a pacing thing with that I will sit down for a chunk. It is quite regular, the kinds of ins and outs of kind of looking up, resetting, and then going back to the page and kind of allowing yourself to kind of unravel a bit on the page and then come back up again, which is not something I've experienced before, so it's quite exciting. It's a perspective that is interesting, and particularly somewhere like the forum where you have obviously so many layers of perspective that you can see at any one time. It's quite
First of all, I love the fact that you've compared yourself to an Olympic swimmer. I think
not necessarily a medal winning one.
No, I think that's good. And I agree with you about that whole thing with the perspective, because what I found over the last couple of years is if I reach a problem and I don't know what the next word is or the next sentence is or the next thing is, if I get stuck, which happens almost every sentence, if I stop and if I look up and I look around and I have a little swig of coffee, or, I see someone and say hi, but even if it's just a couple of minutes, by the time I go back to the page, my subconscious has done the work and it knows, okay, I know what to do here. And that has happened so many times that it's become something that is important to talk about on podcasts, I think, because actually it really does help.
Yeah, and it settles a panic, doesn't it? Because, I mean, in terms of these stops and starts, you can't avoid them. They will happen. They happen on a sentence level, paragraph level, a weekly basis. That and the trick, I guess, is not interpreting those pauses as problems or signs that you can't do it. And I think we both work one-to-one with writers, and we both teach writing. So I'm sure this is something that you've come across with other writers as well. But this idea of when I'm speaking to writers, the panic seems to be, it's not in the writing itself. Quite often the writing is never the problem. It's the knowing the process and kind of not necessarily embracing the difficulties, because they're horrible when they come along, but just knowing, not panicking and not kind of going, well, this is proof that I'm a failure and I can't do it. Just understanding that's part of the process and that it's okay, and that almost it has nothing to do with you at all. It just will kind of happen on its own. I
think that what I've come to learn is that a story is a series of really hard, annoying problems, and I'm sure I've heard George Saunders talk about this, where he said that you have this great idea to start off with, I've got this idea about this or that, and then you sit down to write it and you realise that actually your great idea has got loads of baggage and it's got loads of issues and loads of problems. So that's sort of a macro level, and then you get down to the micro level of the sentence, and then trying to work out how best to go from one to the other. With the book that I've just written, I did it in quite a non-linear way, where we'll come on to talking about handwriting later on, but I would have my A4 page, and I knew that maybe I would have one thing that needs to happen in there, but it might not happen until a little bit into the scene. So I would actually write that bit down physically at the bottom corner of the page, and then I would add something that happens sort of in the middle of the scene, in the middle of the page, and then slowly almost fill in the blanks. And it was this really weird non-linear way of working that really took the pressure off. What's the first sentence? Okay, what's the first paragraph of this scene needs to be? And it would be a case of working in a really weirdly non-linear way.
Like a puzzle.
Kind of like a puzzle. You're right, there's something about the library that I like, because all of life happens in the library. I think writers have got some writers have got a very romanticised kind of image of the library, where they got into reading in the first place. But it's a real hub. It's a real harbour for safety, for resources, for people who might not have internet, who might not have access to certain things. And so you have a diverse cast of characters there, which I find inspiring just to be in and kind of soak up.
Yeah, and it does an important thing in the same way that your kind of puzzle making on the page does, which is almost allow you to have the ideas and do the work away from your own self to a certain degree, and away from, not unless it's never away from your own ego, because writing is purely kind of ego, but the idea that the problems that you stumble over are not related to you, not because of you, because constantly that's what you're faced with, isn't it? Is when you have the problem, it's not even just a technical challenge of how do I write a good line of dialogue, or whatever. It's like, oh my God, I have no imagination, or I have no ideas. And it becomes very personal very quickly. And this is another thing I found with working with other writers, and it's such an interesting process to kind of see almost your own problems reflected back through someone else's words, which happens all the time with teaching and mentoring. But this trying to kind of solve the problem, calm down, and not see it as your own personal flaw, that there isn't something in your personality that's kind of preventing you from getting there. And quite often, if you can relax that way, either by using an approach which does turn into a puzzle, turns into something to solve, but also in an environment where, again, in a public space, quite often you are removed from yourself to a degree. You're not completely within your own company as such, because you're surrounded by lots of other people, and that's really, really useful. And it's wonderful in a city like Norwich, because there are so many places where you can do that, in cafes and various things.
And I believe the National Centre for Writing have just set up a writer's room where you can book. For years that's been the dream, where somewhere you can go and write, and you're kind of authorised to be there. You don't have to continually buy coffee, or do you know what I mean?
Exactly, and also the people, because of the people who work there, people visit there, know what the purpose of this is. You can sort of socialise and interact with people if you want, but they'll leave you alone as well.
Like a bit of water cooler there, don't you? Which again you don't get if you're working at home. If you're working at home in a little office or study, or or in the front room or whatever, you kind of, if everyone's out, you're there by yourself. Yes. And there's no one to. Well, I find there's no real distractions other than the things of the house that need doing. Yeah.
I ignore those.
Well, see, now I'm not very good at ignoring them, but if that's a real talent, to be able to just set that aside and focus.
I'm sure if you come around for coffee in my house, Ben, you would look around the house, you would not see anything in the house as a result of talent.
you've got your loft penthouse now, haven't you?
I do, and this is another important thing to say as well, is that for me, I think we both have different views of this because of the ages of our children, perhaps. But certainly for me, my office, which is at the top of the house, we recently converted the loft into an office. It's like a complete oasis. I am so happy to get in there, and although I can't ever shut out the noise completely from the house because it's quite a small house, for me it's a real sanctuary. So for me, having just said that, public space is useful in that way, I have been craving and loving kind of solitariness in this room and in places where I can. So even when I'm sitting in a cafe, I tend to put headphones on. I try to kind of close myself, because for me this is a complete luxury to have any time for myself. And I think it's so important, I think, when people are struggling with balancing, writing with life pressures, for them to find the happy medium. I think there's lots of people who are quite happy, and Grace Paley wrote a lot about this in lots of her essays, this idea of writing at the table. You can't, particularly for many women, you can't necessarily separate your creative life from your domestic life. And there should be, a facility whereby we can do that if we want. But there's also a feeling of, well, maybe we can do both to a degree as well, because I think it's quite dangerous, not dangerous, but it's quite off-putting to talk about art only ever taking place in these white towers, with solitariness and time and money, because that excludes a lot of people. Which
brings me on to wonderful opportunities of being a writer in residence somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
And you look at the application and you think, well, this could be a way to get some money and to help finance the writing. And you have to spend 2 months somewhere in Wales on your own. And I went, well...
I know, it's outrageous.
I'm not going to not see my kids for 2 months.
No, and I would, as much as that some days sounds like a dream, I wouldn't write well in those conditions. No. And I think you have to, everyone does this to a degree, even writers who are published and you do it as their main profession, they'll have other, activities and tasks that they have to complete. So learning to write with a hubbub of some kind around you and with kind of other distractions is important. But you're right, I find the residency kind of issue is very irritating. I can't apply for any of these things for many years now because the kids are too young.
And I can't help think that, maybe if they provided crash facilities, or maybe if they provided...
and some of them do. I think there are some, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know there are a few organisations that do that, and certainly the National Centre for Writing run their Room of One's Own, which I've taken part in before, which for me was perfect because it was a few days, access with office and a stipend for me to use for childcare. Meant I could turn up and do the writing and go home again and have to make dinner. Hang on a minute, what am I talking about? I want to go on a full residence.
Let's book an Airbnb in Wales.
But again, it's about how to incorporate it, and I don't know how you have experienced this, but certainly I've experienced the full extreme of kind of different circumstances. And when, as most people when they're writing a few years ago was juggling multiple jobs and writing, which obviously has its certain pressures, and then had a complete luxurious amount of time writing independently and not doing any work where I took part in the Charles Pick Fellowship at UEA. That was for 6 months, and then I won an Escalator Prize through National Centre for Writing, which gave me more money to be able to work. So I had, I don't know, maybe at least a year or two of just writing, which is just unbelievable. And then I got married and had children, and now which is great. But so now my professional, my working life involves writing because I teach and mentor, but there's still that pressure of how to incorporate writing. And so for me, my process has changed considerably because I can't access archives and go to libraries, and I can't spend weeks at a time kind of involved in my own kind of work. It has to be done in pockets and things, and that's really changed how I have to work now. And I think a lot of people listening to this will recognise that, and maybe have some experience of having to, well, initially, the hard thing is just trying to get the confidence to carve out time, because as soon as you have to negotiate with other people in order to find your time, you have to have some confidence in order to say that to start with, and sometimes you have to kind of act the confidence until it becomes habitual. But certainly it's been interesting from my perspective to see how that changes the writing itself, how your approach and your opportunities and the windows of time that you have does change the actual writing that comes out. The writing I'm doing these days is not the same as the book that I published. It's a different kind of writing, I think, as a result of this kind of experience.
You're saying that sort of your circumstances, your personal circumstances where you're writing is affecting, and when I say affecting, that's not a judgment call, no, for better or for worse. It's just changing the nature of And do you find that helpful to mix things up like that?
It is now, but for a long time I struggled with it because I was trying to impose my previous way of working onto a timeline and a schedule that just didn't work. And I was kind of like, well, no, I can still read all the books, and I can still, my first book involved a lot of research and a lot of quite kind of, I say studious, but I don't mean this in any real sense. I mean for myself, sitting down and actually making notes and writing from them and being quite organised. And I tried to do that in the same way. I think when my son, who's now 6, when he was under a year, I started as soon as I really tried to take on a project which was quite big in a similar way, and it just wasn't working, and I struggled with that, and so I tried to impose this system onto as kind of a schedule that didn't work. And over time, and in the time I've been writing the book, I've been writing for a very long time now, and I've had 2 children in the process. I've become more relaxed about it, and actually I can see that once you give in, and this is quite funny because after I wrote my first book, I was always talking to people about what, you let the project become what it is. It's going to become what it is. Just relax.
What a luxury.
I know, what a luxury. And I didn't do that at all until recently, until it began to kind of become what it is. So I do see it as it's not really about ideals. It's just, I guess, of understanding that whatever you are experiencing in your life in a way has to be incorporated, even if you're not writing about that specific subject, just to come to some agreement with it, because you can't, what are you going to do? You can't force the work, and you can't force this family. There has to be some way to.
I think it's important to recognise that, and I think it's really interesting that a lot of people would think that the ideal is wherever you are, but to have 8, 9, 10 hours a day to yourself in solitude to work. But actually, like with any kind of creative endeavour, or actually any kind of work, after 2 hours, the human brain, the concentration levels, it just dips, and you get diminishing returns. And so actually, I've noticed that I'm often more productive in pockets of time that I've got and I know about than I would be for a full day. Which can lead to because otherwise, and when you do have the luxury of time, you feel guilty because you're not producing for that 8 hours, if you see what I mean.
Well, you become incredibly sort of impractical about it, don't you? And you kind of think, I think when you have pockets of time, you have to think, okay, what can I conceivably do in half an hour, an hour, 2 hours? And I think you have to be quite selective. And I've come up with kind of a different sort of standards or levels of work depending on what time is available. So I always have, or I generally have, kind of like a research list or a reading list on the go with any one project. So I tend to use, for really small pockets of time, I'll use that to update that and review what books I have to read or things I want to do, which is, it's kind of organised, but it's also, it's fun. It's kind of, the same sort of things one might do when researching what books to read next. One might keep an Amazon list or whatever, a wish list, just to kind of keep tabs on things you might. It's that kind of thing. It's like thinking about, okay, I'm stepping away from the project. What do I need to know about that I don't yet know? Where can I go find it? That kind of question. So there's that kind of activity which doesn't involve the imagination so much. But, a little bit, but not particularly. And then there's other things. There's like, are there bits of passages which I know I need to rewrite that I can just sort of in an hour I can just hopefully very efficiently just pull out and tweak a bit, or is there more kind of bigger overview things that I need to address which will take more time? So then I'll need like a few days.
Your own space for that.
That's quite a useful thing to have, like those tiers. Do you work that way, or do you have? Is it basically you have a pockets of time, you will just go to the sort of next task, the writing task that you have, and try and just do like a little bit of it, or how do you?
That's really interesting. I don't know is the answer, because I think it depends where I'm at in a project. So in the really early days, so I'm in the very early days of a new novel, and it's in that kind of anything's up for grabs, and the more it all kind of builds up in my head for a long period of time. Like I think I had the idea for this a good few years ago, and it slowly forms in my mind and gathers mass like a snowball rolling down a hill until it gets to a point where I think, okay, I need to start making some notes. So then it will be a case of just notes, and I don't want to do that too early because I don't want to diminish what is in my head, because there's something, as soon as you put something down on paper or on a screen, somehow it is really reductive, whereas there's a lot more possibility and it's a lot more malleable when it's in your brain. But once you get to that stage, there is a process there. Normally I would make handwritten notes, but for this one I'm kind of experimenting slightly, and I think this might be to do with age, because I'm kind of trying to do more digital stuff, whereas before I've been very analog. I've wrote the last pilot in pencil and paper.
Oh, pencil, the sharpening duties.
The sharpening duty, the kind of almost ritual of it. The tool that you use to write physically gets smaller the more work you do, which is always nice. And I've got a bag of little stubby pencil ends like this from the thing. And in fact, actually, we did like a first limited edition 100 run of the novel when it first came out in this country, and I put pencil shavings from the drafting process in the front.
I missed out on that. I got your stamp, but I didn't get that.
Oh, you got the stamp? I've got some pencil shavings knocking around.
Thanks.
I could sprinkle them liberally. But there's something quite visceral and kind of, I don't know, quite organic. And the thing I like about writing in pencil is that, or pen actually, is that if you, well, first of all, it feels far less definitive and final than writing on a screen. Yeah. If you delete something, if you cross something out, you can still see that which you have removed afterwards. So if you want to refer back to it, if you need to look at it in a different context, I mean, often when I'm writing, I'll work on a line, but I will write several versions of that line as I'm going, and I'm not sure which one is best until I feel like I've got the words in the right order, and then I'll cross out the other ones. Yeah. So oftentimes, I'll have a page and it's full, but then I'm like
but it's just like, well,
and then I'll probably decide to cut it anyway. But yeah, I do like that, but it does mean that you end up lugging a lot of paper around and a lot of books. So for this one, I'm kind of experimenting. I've come on to writing tools and gadgets in a bit, but I'm experimenting with this app called Milan Note, I think it's called, and it's almost like a digital canvas, and you can bung in anything. And so you just bung in notes, texts, links, video, anything you want. You can even draw directly onto it, which is quite nice. And so what I've been able to do with that is bung all this stuff in, and then once it's on the screen, move it around and group stuff together that feels thematically the same, or feels like it's okay. Well, this is more kind of the beginning stuff. This is more background stuff. Yeah. And then also I'll have an overview of the shape of the book starting to form as well. Yes. Which is quite nice. Yes. Which again is something that I would often do on paper anyway, in terms of scribbling it out. But I just felt like this way I don't have to break my back carrying stuff, because I'm obviously getting old. Well,
as I say, we're both getting to the age where now like our back is a consideration. It makes me kind of sad, but it should be. Our backs are the way they are because we haven't been treating it as a consideration. Exactly. That's the problem.
Invest in a good chair, kids. That's my number one writing tip.
Simple but so profound.
So profound.
Yeah. So I love that idea, and also it kind of challenges sometimes the perception of sort of gadgetry in writing, and that it can be this idea that it's faddy, that it's somehow not a sort of three-dimensional tool, which just isn't right anymore. It's not just Microsoft Word that people are using. I do still use that. For me, I don't want the gadget. So I use a lot of gadgetry, as you've seen me use a lot of time in the forum. I have like a portable electronic typewriter thing that I use. Tell me about your gadgets. Oh, great! So it's great. Okay, so I have a few. So I have a few things, but I feel I've reached a point where I just have an abundance of tools which I can use when I need to. So I have an electronic typewriter which I use for first draft, idea sort of dump writing, so to speak.
Is that an old typewriter?
No. This is like a new thing. So it's a free write Alpha, which is what I use, which is a kind of like it's Astro House is the organisation that make them, and it's kind of like an updated version of an Alpha word processing device that was popular in sort of 80s, 90s, which apparently you can't get anymore. Anyway, so it's quite nice. It has like a clacky keyboard, and it's quite light, so we can take it away. And also it has a really small screen, so you can't really read back what you've written. Oh, it's a black and white. Yeah, sorry. Yes, I was like, yes, I think I know what that means, but I'm not going to, just in case I misunderstood what you meant.
Does that help you avoid distractions?
It helps me avoid. Well, I'm actually pretty good at that. I think I don't suffer too much from that. So if I'm working on a computer, I don't tend to go on the internet and things. I'm relatively focused that way. But what it does mean is that I can't really read back and change sentences or edit it. You can do that if you want, but I choose not to, and it is difficult to do it on the actual device. So for me, it's gotten me into the habit of sort of accepting that first drafts are messy and seriously, and I type very quickly, but my accuracy is appalling. It's really bad. So in fact, it's full of mistakes when I look at it online. It's all connected via Wi-Fi, so you can read your documents quite straight away online. But I use that as kind of like a dump. But that's kind of like, it depends what kind of writing it is that if it feels like I desperately need to get into something without worrying too much about how I do that, without worrying about the writing itself being interesting, that's the device I use for that.
Okay.
And what I've got into the habit recently, we have spoken about this previously in the past, so I had an operation recently, and as I was recuperating from this operation, I had a complete aversion to all technology. Like, I couldn't, like, not in a sort of evangelistic kind of way, but I found I couldn't really, my mind was sort of a bit muddled, I think, from the anaesthetic and things, and I couldn't do it. So I started writing by hand instead, just to try. I think it's a way to engage your body somehow, to wake your body up by having something physical.
There's a proper physicality.
Yeah, and so that worked for a while. And then what I've got into the habit of doing subsequently, which is like, so I can't really do first draft. I can do notes and imaginative, like, sort of stream of consciousness-y type writing, handwritten, that's fine. If I need to get into something, a particular subject, and I need to cover a lot of ground in my mind, I can't do it that way because it's not quick enough. I need something that's quicker, in which case I use one of these this typewriter. But then what I do is, when the writing has got to a point where I need to sort of print off the paper, and I do tend to print off paper and look to see what opportunities are in these passages of writing, then I'll get the notebooks out and I'll handwrite into those. So I might annotate the paper, but then I'll also have a notebook where I'm sort of referencing and expanding, and that slows me down. So I have a habit of writing in kind of broad strokes without a lot of detail, and sometimes I think I've written more detail than I have, and I know now I consciously have to slow down and actually kind of not fill in to like pad it out, but to really kind of be more precise about what I'm saying. So that's when I find that writing by hand really helps. And I do have lots of other apps, kind of like the one you mentioned, but for me, I haven't ever found a way to do that yet, and I think it might be one of those things where you need a brand new project in order to do that. Like, I couldn't use that now on the novel I'm writing now because it's too far down.
You can't change halfway through.
No.
Although having said that, I'm finding actually, I've the other app that I've got for this project, for this novel, it's a journaling app, and I've sort of changed it to be, I think this novel is going to have a lot of, nostalgia is the wrong word, but there's going to be a lot set in the past, and I feel like the narrator is going to be perhaps reminiscing in quite a fragmented way, and so I thought, well, journal entries are naturally fragmented, so I thought if I write them in that, but I found that I'm finding it really hard to write directly into that thing. So what I've had to do, I've got like 2 tiers. I've got like the crap early stuff, and then what I consider to be like a more of a refined thing. So I've split them out. But even now, I'm still writing by hand before I put it in. So that's still that bit of process, I think, is going to have to stay.
Well, I think that can be, and it all sounds, I guess anyone listening to this might think we're entirely insane, and really you just need to write down what you're thinking. But actually, it's such a physical thing that it does make a difference. And I find, particularly if you have kind of low confidence, so you're not really sure about, if you're like me, so your first drafts are an absolute state and there really isn't much to redeem them at all, and anyone reading them would think you're completely mad. If you need help that way, then it's quite helpful to have something that allows you to get something on the page that you can work with very quickly without you having kind of access, without you kind of fiddling with it. And I know some people, write sentence to sentence. They don't necessarily write in this way. But I think the tools are there. Why not use them if you can? And in fact, I do even have an old 1970s Olympia typewriter, same as Don DeLillo's, which was bought specifically for that reason. Because it's like a channel. He's like, and that does something else. So that's really slow because it really hurts your hands.
Yes.
But that's quite useful and so beautiful to look at. I mean, a typewritten sheet is like,
yes,
gorgeous.
But and as you were right, because I have also a typewriter.
Yeah.
It is, now I'm going to forget what it is.
Oh, sorry.
It's the one Cormac McCarthy had, not his actual one.
He had a really fancy, the beautiful one. Is it quite beautiful?
Ovoletti.
Yes, I know which one you mean. Yes.
I've got that one.
I've gone for the workhorse. You've gone for the Ferrari of the typewriter.
But it does. The typewriter does force you to think more before you hit the keys as well, because it's a nightmare to try and correct anything on there. But it is satisfying. It makes a satisfying noise. There's a real physicality to it.
Yes.
It does, going back to backs, it does hurt your back after a while.
It does.
But
it slides across the desk because you need one of those rubber mats to put them on. But no, that's exactly, particularly with these free write devices, I think they're beautiful and great, but I do feel a little bit self-conscious because it does have that kind of connotation, that kind of thing. But for me, I feel, so I grew up in the 80s, 90s, but so I would always write, by hand as a child, and then my mum and dad bought me, it was in fact sort of the travelling version of the typewriter I have now, and I for writing stories, I liked writing stories, and that was my first object, kind of sacred object was this typewriter. And then when they were available, we had an Apple word processor, one of the first ones. So I started using that, but I always used the typewriter. So for me, these things are, I mean, they are a bit superfluous. You don't necessarily need them, but they have that kind of aura of my 10-year-old self. And to me, I think any object or any kind of process which allows you to connect with, I think everyone has a certain age or a certain period in their life where for them writing was about fun, and it was about excitement, and it was about adventure and all these sorts of things. I think everyone has, 10 is probably like a classic kind of age, isn't it, for that sort of thing. Anything that makes me feel I connect with that's the energy I want. That's what I'm looking for. So I don't feel kind of ashamed about these things, because they make me feel, particularly these free write devices, they have sort of an 80s-esque feel to them. I like that. I'm going there.
Well, I think that anything you can do to connect to the fun, and because writing is supposed to be, creative writing is supposed to be fun, and if it gets too serious, then I think the composition suffers. And I always try and remind people when I'm teaching the How to Write Fiction course for the National Centre for Writing that to remember to have fun, because that's what, if it's not fun, then why are you bothering? And if it's not fun to write, then it's not going to be fun to read. I'm not saying that it's not hard at times. Of course it is hard at times. But I like I like that idea of tools, and I like the idea of, the word workshop. It used to be an actual thing. Somewhere you'd go and you'd get messy and you'd get inky and you'd cut things up, and all of these things have got like a real analog sort of like start. But you're having your first typewriter.
It's objects, it's talismans, isn't it? It's being, and this is something I found when I was doing research for my novel Everyone Is Watching, which is about New York City, and I went back. I won an Arts Council grant to go to New York, which is a place I'd spent a bit of time in before, but never for the purposes of research, because I started researching this in the UK. And I went back and I held objects. There was a New York Public Library had Robert Moses' papers, who's one of the figures I was researching, and there's nothing in there that's personal. I don't even know if he kept a diary. I'd be very surprised if he kept a diary. But they had kind of his business papers, and they had lots of kind of very informative, very dry bits of, but they're typewritten. So someone has smack those keys and they've imprinted in
history, right?
I managed to see a lock of Walt Whitman's hair. His hair.
Oh, that's creepy, because he was a very hairy person.
Lots of hair to give out, so that's fine. So I mean, it's not exactly a precious commodity, but oh my goodness. And then went to Los Angeles and to look at the Robert Mapplethorpe archive there, and they have what he's called his fetish necklaces, which these beautiful necklaces which he made, and which I held them. I mean, I had gloves on, but I mean, there's something so transformative about that, and I think writing, which is so kind of embedded in your imagination, in your mind, and it feels kind of nebulous and difficult to hold. Physicality is still an important part to play, and it can be done in the sort of research, but it can be done in the writing, in the tools that you've just described. The connection to the real world is an important aspect of writing.
Tangibility.
Yes.
And I think that's really important on the page and off the page.
Yes, and also that's to do with play. It's like, children with building blocks, they're touching all the time. And I think you mentioned the course, and I teach the intermediate level for the fiction for National Centre for Writing. Quite often this is for people with some experience of writing who need to kind of push their skills or want to sort of delve deeper into it. And it's so incredible how the early modules for this course are very much about kind of, okay, well, let's sort of think about why we write, what interests us, and what are our tastes, what do we read, what do we watch, what do we listen to. Let's think about that for a while, because this, it has to connect with us, has to come with us from some, and let's play, where and the sort of the transformative power of that and there's so many writers who, as soon as they've understood that to kind of try and shelve the worry and try and access that energy that they had maybe as a child or in another part of their life, particularly for lots of women who perhaps have had a lifetime's worth of caring for others, children or other relatives, who haven't had a lot of time to themselves, who haven't had a chance to kind of really think about their own imagination in that way, to sort of say, okay, this is your chance to start that again. Let's go back to where you had that energy and try and find something. And it just is so incredible to watch it. And the writing is always better, always, once that person has done that. And quite often, I'll have people say, like, oh, I didn't realise it could be fun. And do you know what I mean? Yeah, and I'm like, exactly. Yes. It's so great.
Well, look, I'm going to ask you about your early influences, because I think that early influences can really shape the artists that we...
You're going to be surprised with the first I'm going to say. Yeah.
So let me ask you about your early influences.
Well, in terms of books, I mean, I read...
It could be anything.
It could be anything. Well, but certainly books are the things. I grew up in South Norfolk without much access to transport or anything. So all we had, which was in the house, and we always had lots of books and things. And my parents were always supportive of me reading whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
And so Stephen King was my first. I mean,
okay.
Clearly children's books before then, but I did start reading him when I was about 9-10 years old.
Wow.
And my primary school teachers were very concerned about this, and they did take my mum aside and say, "Is this entirely appropriate?" And she says she's reading, and she loves them. So
so back in your
Stephen King, but also, and so if anyone doesn't know my writing, I really don't write horror.
Yes.
I don't, absolutely not, and things with not an awful lot of plot in them. So it's certainly but the influence is profound, and it's to do with the imagination, but also such incredible empathy, Stephen King, in his novels. And I remember certainly the ones which probably were far too old to read at the time, Dolores Claiborne, which deals with sexual abuse, for example, or Rose Madder, which is about domestic violence and these sorts of things. But his love for people is astounding, and I think that's the thing I loved as a child. So I obviously loved the gore and he loved the horror and so, but that sense of a book containing emotion or translating emotion into a story.
Into a story.
Yeah.
Well, this is you touched on something really important with that, in the sense that a novel, a story, it has to be about some element of the human heart. It has to be about some element of humanity, and you can set that in a horror place, or you put in sci-fi, it doesn't matter. So like, if people ask me what my book is about, my first novel, The Last Pilot, is about a marriage in crisis against the backdrop of the space race.
Yes.
And you might look at the blurb and you might see the
space
word
race,
but it's not about that. And you could, in theory, you could take that story and plant it anywhere, and have the similar kind of effect. Now, the background enhances a lot of those themes, but anyway, go back to little you.
So I read Stephen King, but also I did read a lot of horror. I read a lot of point horror. I read Bloom. Writers like Philippa Pierce, Jenny Nimmo, when I was a bit younger than that. And I remember the first time I read, apart from the Stephen Kings, which are adult, books, the first kind of books, adult books, not adult books, but books that not necessarily designed for children, was Isabel Allende. I read House of Spirits on a family holiday, and I remember specifically buying, because it's a book my mum loved, and we went to the airport bookshop. She said, "Here, try this," because I didn't know what to read, and oh my God, and that was it. I mean, oh my God.
Does your mum know that the influence that had?
I don't know if we've ever spoken about it. I mean, we talked a lot about my love of Stephen King, and she's ever so proud about how controversial it was in South Norfolk village for me to be reading. That's outrageous. But so no, I don't know if she knows at all about that. But certainly her recommendations, and she's always been really supportive of reading, and she's a great reader herself, and would very much talk about writing and books as books. She read to us all the time. Little House on the Prairie and things like that. But certainly, so the books I had access to were the ones she had read and enjoyed, and she said, "Well, try this." And I think I must have been about 12, I guess, when I read House of Spirits, but then followed all the other books that she'd read and enjoyed and thought I would like Margaret Atwood influence. And then I read lots of Angela Carter, lots of women writers predominantly. And then at high school, I think I probably didn't read an awful lot. I think that's what happens.
I think that is what happens, actually, because there was a period of my life where I didn't read an awful lot as well.
Similar age.
And you kind of forget, and you think, people ask you questions about what books you enjoyed growing up and stuff. But there was a whole period of my life where I really can't remember having much on the shelf at all.
Yes.
And I had had the incredibly important foundation like you've had growing up, and then it wasn't until I was in sixth form and A-level English, and we did Heart of Darkness, and we did Gatsby, and it just blew my mind as to what fiction was capable of. And I think that really opened the door. And then I remember another period where I was just started working in London, so I'd have a long commute, and I'd be reading a lot of Hunter S. Thompson, and I'd be reading Martin Amis, and these books that, again, were like mind-blowing, really.
I remember reading the Rachel papers again at a very, very young age. I should perhaps not have been reading it.
I wasn't like 4 like you were.
No, I mean, as a teen, but that's... I thought it was going to be like Adrian Mole. And it really isn't. It's great.
I love Adrian Mole, by the way.
Of course, yes, of course.
Absolutely love Adrian Mole.
But it's interesting you say you're talking about sort of periods of your life. It's not a consistent thing, is it? And I when I look back, there are big kind of sort of moments, and you forget kind of sort of the desert times where I remember desperately wanting to read something that meant meant something to me, and not really finding how, and I'd read a lot of, the books that my mum enjoyed, but I wanted something for myself.
Yeah.
But actually that didn't happen. I went through university enjoying the books that we studied, but not really finding my thing. And it wasn't until I moved to Edinburgh, and I think in 2008 with my now husband, and we were in a whole new sort of cultural landscape, and suddenly, and the libraries there are fantastic as well. And I felt really enthusiastic about doing new things and exciting things, so I took up running and I started listening to new music and things. And my husband, who's very well read as well, he was like, we had all of our books, he got lots of books out of storage, and I started reading his books. So I read a lot of Faulkner, and I read a lot of American writers and modernist writers, and I was like, oh, okay. I remember just spending a lot of time reading Faulkner and kind of going, well this is good, isn't it? Like, how do we do this? Can someone explain how do we do this? But again, not really having any answers. They don't really give you the answers, but they give you the sort of this energy that you're trying to find something, not to copy, because you can't copy Faulkner, Ben. I don't know if you've tried, but
what's interesting, I think, is that people do start off trying to imitate their heroes, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
I was a huge Douglas Adams fan. I still am.
Yeah.
But when I was sort of 11, that Hitchhikers really made me want to be a writer.
Yeah.
And also, actually, how Douglas Adams would talk about the publishing industry was also made me want to be a writer. So, my really early stuff was kind of sci-fi comedy stuff, which was fun to write, but it wasn't really coming alive on the page. And it wasn't until much later on that I kind of started to move away from that, and I started to, I guess, underwrite and kind of have a more of a kind of reserved style that things started to happen for me.
But also like humour's a massive part of your writing as well. I mean, the humour is there, and specifically in the dialogue, in a kind of an undertone, a rumbling underneath the kind of conversations. There's a lot of humour in your, but I can see how that it's found its own sort of place.
Its own little place. Yes, because I think it's important to have humour, because if you don't have humour, you're missing out on the whole thing of life.
You're a really funny guy, as well. So you would.
But now I can't think of anything funny.
No,
to
I'm sorry.
say.
but it's quite difficult to put jokes in writing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's hard to be funny in writing anyway, and it has to come really from the character, from the situation. Yeah, you can slip it. It's good to slip at the odd gag in, and I think that there's those things that you kind of are super proud of. That's a keeper.
Yeah, I find humour sort of difficult, and I wouldn't say it's kind of a natural facet of my writing, but someone did once say that my book was funny, the novel I published was funny. And actually I was looking at it recently, because I did an event, I was reading it back, and actually there is more humour in it than I would have remembered, that I'd remembered. I hadn't really remembered.
You might not notice it so much as someone else does.
Well, I'm very naturally funny, as you know personally.
Well, of course, we wouldn't be friends.
But also you're thinking about when you're writing, you're very, again, like everyone, you're very focused on not necessarily problems, but kind of the issues and the seriousness. And for me, it's taken a long time in my writing to kind of mine deeply into kind of ideas, and for me that is a serious kind of pursuit. So if there's humour in it, it's kind of by happenstance, it's not really by design. Well, that's the best way. Because I really like, I read a lot of books that Fitzcarraldo Editions publish. They're my favourite publisher. Beautiful. Absolutely astounding. And when Septology by John Foss was published by them a few years ago, I think, oh my god, that he's such a great example of that, very kind of serious, very profound, very poignant themes that he's talking about, and he's talking about death, and he's talking about religion and art and lots of things. But they're humans, their characters are human. They have the humour in there is also, and the way he blends that together is such a brilliant example. He has a sort of perception of both the profundity, but also kind of the silliness of human experience. And so it's such an enriching kind of full writing that it's just incredible. Well, humour, astounding.
If you can make someone laugh, and if you can make someone cry, they're all emotions, and if you can elicit those emotions in somebody, in a reader, then they will form a real attachment to the book, to your work. And I think it's such a compliment whenever somebody says your book made me cry, or your book made me laugh, or even anger, I guess. I mean, I don't think anyone's said they've
your book made me really angry.
No, but actually, having said that, I have had some nice Amazon reviews that have commented on the lack of speech marks. And,
that's going to do it. Yes, and I too never write speech marks.
I never ever thought this would be an issue. I never thought it was an issue.
I love this argument. It's so funny.
But I was asked about it constantly from readers. And I just had to come up with different answers each time to keep myself amused. So I would say, oh, the key was broken on the Mac.
I was going to say, that's what you could say. That's a great idea.
That's always a fun one.
Well, no, because the thing is it becomes very sort of a preciousist kind of argument, because it's very completely dependent on the work you're talking about. But my feeling has always been really that one should know through the speech itself that someone is talking, and if not, but also I quite like the idea that sometimes you don't always know, that sometimes maybe something could be a thought, or it could be, as long as it's not sort of purposely confusing. And John Foss is a great example, because he does things with perspective, with point of view that should not be possible, to be able to do what he does and also keep it clear what's going on. Oh my God, it's incredible. So in fact, the journey you're reading, the experience you're reading, is not necessarily, it is the journey of the character, but really you're experiencing your own changing perceptions of how stories should work. That's the experience of reading, and it's like...
and this is the thing, there are sound stylistic, but you're right, there was, I found them... in the last pilot anyway, to be a distraction. I wanted to have a more subtlety in the dialogue, and I wanted it to be... I didn't want it to be pronouncing someone's speech. Like,
no, and it
someone's speech.
And it does indicate a transition of perspective, because you suddenly, and it depends on what you're writing, but certainly the thing I'm writing at the moment, the experience is supposed to be that you're kind of constantly in someone's mind. And as soon as the speech or the way they're experiencing the dialogue of someone else is part of that experience. You're still with her the whole time. So as soon as you declare that a piece of a speech is separate, you are effectively removing that person. But it's different. I mean, for books which have an omniscient narrator that might be moving around, that isn't perhaps so fixed, and that makes sense. It makes sense because that narrator would sort of direct and dictate where things are on the page. But I love that it's such a hot topic.
Who knew?
Such a rebel then.
I know. I feel like I want to have a separate little document with just all the speech marks in, and then sell it alongside the novel for people. Like, there you go. If you want to.
That's very Oulipo. That's very...
I don't know what that means.
Okay. A group of writers that did a funny sort of things like writing, novels without the letter E. That is kind of,
those wacky guys.
Yes, those guys.
Let's go back to reading, because I'm really interested in your experience of reading as a mother when your kids were really young. Were you able to read fiction then, or did it kind of go out the window?
Oh yeah, I've never stopped, and I made it a point to purposely try and stay in touch with my reading, because that to me is the joy of life. And I just thought, I'm not having this child interrupt that. But you have to do it in different ways. So I listen to my kids are 6 and 2, so they're still little. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. That's how I get around that.
Great
so
idea.
when
growing segment, I believe.
Oh, I love audio, but I always have. I did as a child, so it's kind of returning to that a bit. So I listen to audiobooks when I'm doing jobs or walking around, or at night time, because I'm usually too tired really to sort of read with my eyes. But also I read lots of different things, certainly shorter work that is perhaps emphasising the present moment rather than sort of a complicated plot that I'd have to remember, sort of like so a book that sort of expresses an experience as opposed to kind of giving you kind of information, if that makes sense.
Because obviously your brain is being taken up by, well, my brain certainly, when my kids were young, a million other things. And I found it difficult to have the headspace to read anyway. But I have OCD as well, and that makes reading incredibly challenging, or it has done for a good decade. So I was always kind of one of those things that I would think, well, I'm not reading much because I'm writing a lot.
Yes.
And it's like the chef who doesn't want to cook when he gets home.
Yeah.
Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or the gynecologist who gets.
Yeah.
There you go. And if you're making sausages all day in the sausage factory, you don't want to go home and eat sausages.
No.
But I found it incredibly hard, and I found it incredibly difficult as well in terms of headspace. So there's that. But then I feel like that's just another gap in my life where I didn't read that much. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I wasn't taking in stories, because I was. Because if you look at movies and the quality of television programs that we have had over the last 10 years, it's kind of it's incredible, really. So many prestige TV shows have been described as a novel on the screen, or likewise, or their own thing. But it's all narrative, as I say to kids. And I like to think that your movie ticket is a tax allowable expense.
Oh yeah, well it's research, isn't it? I mean, everything like that it's really good.
Yeah,
no, I agree. Anything like that, and in fact, I've had a stack of books on my bedside table which just sit there, and they're like little sort of things that I look at, and they kind of give me pleasure even just looking at them without opening them.
You don't need to open them.
You don't need them, but certainly I did make a conscious decision when the children were born that I wouldn't let that slip, and also I wouldn't start reading kind of stuff that I wouldn't seem as valuable. I had the sort of advantage of working for many years as a bookseller, so I have kind of techniques of finding out what to read. Certainly, Fitzcarraldo Editions are the publisher that I go to, and actually when the kids were born, which probably isn't sensible, but the point where you don't have a lot of concentration or mind space, I actively sought those books out because I read a lot of Annie Ernaux, politically charged books about fragmented narratives, books about women's experience, because I felt kind of renewed, sort of politicised by sort of the inequalities that one was suddenly experiencing. So I fed that. I fed that with my book.
That's a great idea. You have the funnel and you pour everything. I'm pointing to my head for people who can't see on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
It all goes in, and then something will.
Yeah, and all that reading I did, and a lot of it probably I read and didn't all retain in my conscious mind, but it's stayed there, and it comes out now. Now that I have more time, it's coming out.
Of course.
And that's what I like. I mean, the thing about books, and even if you don't write, you stumble over like an author or a thought even, which is so transformative, but not in a way that you can. But it builds you, it feeds you, and that's what excites me. And that's what excites me about being a teacher and a mentor as well, because that happens when you're reading other writers' work. That energy, you find that little nugget, and the privilege of being able to say to the writer who generally doesn't know that it's there, and you say it's there, it's right there,
gold.
And they're like, voice. Really? And they're like, but I thought that was, I just wrote that, off the cuff, and I'm like, exactly, that's it. It's so exciting.
It's that Dolly Parton thing.
Figure out who you are and do it on purpose. That's it. Find out who you are and do it on purpose. And the finding is, difficult, but that's why courses and mentoring is so good, because it shows that it hopefully reveals that writer's work back to themselves in a new way.
And it is rewarding, like as I mentor as well, and to be able to help a writer who often doesn't have a huge amount of self-confidence, to identify those strengths and then draw themselves out and just develop that voice is really, it's really rewarding. Yeah, and to do it over such a long time as well. The mentoring I do is over 12 months, and that's such a glorious window. It does, because this doesn't happen quickly. You need time, and also you need time to build up a relationship with the writer to kind of understand really and sort of understand their life a bit, to see what are their pressures, what are their restrictions. Absolutely, because it's about it's not just about being like an editor. It's about being a coach. It's about being a guide. It's about being a therapist at times.
Sometimes.
As well as all of the technical stuff. Yeah. So that is rewarding. And then obviously when you come back to your own work, because you vocalise some of these things that might have only been in your own head, you can bring it back to your own practice.
You can, I do that quite a lot. And I'd be like, okay, well, if I have this problem, if I was speaking to someone else, how would I suggest they go about it? Yeah. And I give very good advice.
I'm so I can hear that, because I'm just going to message you constantly when I have problems.
You have to pay, Ben, but yes.
Okay.
No, it's really good. It keeps the cogs turning. And I think before I started this work, and I didn't even really know this was work that you could do, but I would have imagined that it would take away some of the writing energy that one has. But it's the complete opposite. Yeah. It's wonderful. Yeah. And to see what difference it makes. Yeah, it does. Yeah. I love it. It's fantastic.
Yes, there's nothing like reading someone exciting and fresh and thinking, oh my goodness, I need to up my game. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. All the time.
All the time. Yeah. Rereading for pleasure is something that I like to do as well. I read last year The Crow Road by Ian Banks.
Oh, that's a brilliant book.
Which is a brilliant book.
That was one of the first ones I read of his.
Was it? Yeah. I suppose you didn't read The Wasp Factory first when you were a toddler.
No, I didn't. I only I came across his writing at university. Okay, through the reading list.
But that's the pleasure, and I think people forget that reading fiction is supposed to be a pleasurable activity. Yeah. And actually, if you're reading something that isn't giving you pleasure, that you're not enjoying, it's okay to just
stop reading.
Stop reading.
Absolutely.
I'm quite brutal. I don't. If you can't engage me, if you can't move me, if you can't do all the things that you need to do in the first couple of pages, I'm not interested.
Well, this is such a unique thing, because that's your response, your own personal response, but for someone else it might be, it might work. You just
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it might work for somebody else.
And coming to things at the right time in your life as well. And I remember when I was probably about 10, I could read Stephen King, but I tried to read Susan Cooper, The Dark is Rising, which it was a good one. Found it really difficult to get into, and came back to it a couple of years later when I was about 12, I think. And was like, oh, okay, well, this is amazing. And actually that's one of the things I started to listen to after I'd had kids. I'd started to listen to an audiobook, Philip Pullman novels, which are obviously incredible. But the Susan Cooper, and I'd come down in the morning, and my husband's also a writer, I'd be like, did you see what she does with point of view though? She was, and we'd be having these big conversations over breakfast. I'm completely mind blown.
This wonderfully idyllic literary.
Oh no, I am exaggerating the context of that. It's not quite as sanguine. Yeah, just looking at it with a reader's, an excited kid's hat, because that's still a hat I wear, but also with sort of a mind of, with the sort of the technical knowledge of knowing about how point of view work or should work, and then being able to sort of say to writers, it's always a surprise to say, like, a book you really need to read is The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper. They're like, a kid's book? What? And I'm like, yes, exactly. And so that's always fun to kind of refine books and then feed that back into the reading lists and things. Definitely. I love that.
Yeah. It reminds me, my favourite kids' book, I think, one of my favourite books of all time is a kids' book. It's Danny the Champion of the World.
Oh yes, that's my favourite of his.
But I Will Die on This Hill, the version that has the Jill Bennett illustrations. Nothing against Quentin Blake.
Oh yes. But they're nicer, aren't they? It suits that.
Yeah, it suits that slightly older story, I think, and that. Yeah.
I love that novel.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a heartbreaker.
It is. It's a heartbreaker. So tell me, I want to go back to talking about your current work. Where are you at with that at the moment?
That's a good question. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, so I've been working on this for a very long time, but it's one of those projects that began as something completely different. And although this is now a separate project, it has morphed from one idea that's completely over there on the other side of the room, has become something else. So the book I'm working on now is still interested in American history, so it involves a lot of thought about the Oregon Trail and about settling the emigrant trail of the 19th century, indigenous land rights and climate change. But the storyline is predominantly a very heavily pregnant woman crossing America west with a group of friends.
And am I right in thinking this is the one that's got the working title of West?
West, yes, indeed.
Because I've read some of this, and it was some fine stuff.
Did you like it?
I did, yeah.
Well, hopefully that little snippet I'm very proud of. No, I'm very proud of all of it, but it's again, it's been a very difficult beast to wrestle because of my approach to it, and it does have a lot of history in it, and history is certainly a recurring theme, I think, in everything that I write. But certainly with this book, it's not the sort of book which is looking directly at the history in the same way that my first novel was, which looked very directly at certain characters and figures and historical periods. So this one is kind of like it's written with the essence of that history, and I'm very interested in sort of witnessing that trail, which is still very visible, still very marked in the land. You can see these wagon swales, but in the ground where the wagons passed over the country. But also, that history covers other history, much deeper history, much longer history. And the sort of image I like, and the one I keep coming back to whenever I work on this book, is this idea that lots of modern roads in America follow the trail, the original trail that was there. That trail had followed native trails, hunting trails. Those trails are the trails that animals took because of the geology of the land, which was created by glacial shifts and stuff like this. So this idea of like layered history, what it's trying to do is access that, but through the perspective of a very heavily pregnant woman who's kind of recently orphaned. She has no family, she has no partner, but she has her friends, and how you interpret that kind of landscape in that kind of emotional and physical state. So that's what it has become. So I've done lots of writing that's led me to this point, and now I'm at the stage where I'm trying to incorporate all that back into it with that this Dolly Parton thing, find out what it is and do it on purpose. I found out what it is, and so now I'm in the process of doing it on purpose.
It's interesting that the process is incredibly inefficient, isn't it?
Oh, it's awful.
But am I right in thinking, and I'm sure you told me this once, that you have physically cut up pages?
Oh yeah. I haven't done it with this project just because I have no space. Everything's covered in Lego and things like that. But certainly in the past, for my first novel, I did that. I cut out paragraphs and do it that way. And I have been doing that on the screen a bit with this. But what I've done is in a way, so I work out of sequence. I tend to work, in a fragmentary way anyway. So for me, the biggest challenge, so I've given myself the biggest challenge in trying to write a journey which is sequential. So it has to, and I did think for a lot of time maybe I could just write it like random, but no, it has to follow a particular trail. So I've done lots of kind of studies about, okay, where would they go? How long would that take for them to get from this place to this place? That has been very difficult for me because that isn't how my mind works.
Right.
So I've tried to balance sequential linear writing in terms of the process of actually doing the writing, sitting down and writing in a sequence, with a more fragmentary way, which is more my sort of natural way of doing it, and trying to find a narrative tone that balances all of that. This is why it's not finished yet.
Can you get on and finish it, please?
Thank you. But also another thing to say, and this is important for anyone who has young kids, and particularly for anyone who's breastfeeding, is that actually my inability to see this pattern has largely, hopefully, been resolved. I've stopped feeding my daughter recently, and she's like 2.5, and I realise as my body is kind of getting back to itself and kind of making connections again, that for a long time I haven't had the ability to interpret what I've written. Right. So I've done all this writing, but I found it very difficult to kind of put it all together. So I'm hoping I'm going to have this renaissance now that my body is my own again. Yeah. But what an incredible thing to realise that one's physical body controls the imagination to such a degree. But also it's helpful because the novel itself is about that. It's about that. So
that's
this is
great. You can feed that into the work. I mean, I know what you mean. Not because I've ever breastfed before, but because I have got long COVID at the moment.
Yes.
And brain fog is a real symptom of that, and it is very weird how your physicality can affect things like your imagination, your ability to recall stuff, to hold stuff in your head. If you're thinking about a novel, and that's a huge thing that gets developed, like a big 3-dimensional shape that sits in my mind, and it's very difficult to kind of to build it, to see it, to so I'm hoping all that will slowly come back.
Do you know what this is? I mean, you would think hopefully that with this being such a pressing issue for so many people with long COVID and things, that this will change how things are run. I have everyone to a degree, writing takes time. Of course, it takes time anyway, but there are certain situations, whether it's because you're looking after people through illness or lack of access to resources, there's a reason why you don't do it by a certain time. So I am completely against any kind of age limit with prizes or retreats, and all this thing is a ridiculous idea. And I think any programs like the Escalator program, for example, the National Centre for Writing run, where they're looking specifically to help those who might not be represented on the bookshelves for lots of reasons, but including this sort of access to time, but also to say to writers, that there isn't a time limit. It does take a long time.
It does take a long time, and you can start at any stage in your life, and there is I think there's a perception that actually you have to be young to do it.
No,
actually, I think the writers only get good as they get older.
Oh yeah.
When they've got something to say, when they've had some experience in life.
I think it's all so specific, isn't it? It doesn't. I mean, I certainly have more to say now than I did 20 years ago. But I mean, it's just keeping that door open for everyone, and I don't think age restrictions are helpful. Personally.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, I can't remember anyone at the moment, but there's so many writers who have made a start.
Annie Proulx, she's one of them. Was she 60 when she published
something like that? I think.
And it's Annie Proulx. Holy moly!
Exactly.
She's amazing.
So there is no, and I think it puts people off because they see, nothing against her or her work, but Sally Rooney being sort of young and vital and stuff, and think, well, I can't do that. That ship has sailed.
Yeah.
And I think. I think that's true of some industries, for better or worse, but it's definitely not true for writing.
No.
Which is encouraging, because I hope that I've still got some more books left in me.
Of course you have.
Yeah, I have. But I think David Mitchell likened them to aeroplanes that are circling the airfield, and every now and then he calls one down to land.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a lovely way.
That's a lovely thing to do with it. Yeah, no, that's certainly what I've got my faith in.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a good few in various stages of pre-production, as it were. And then you work out which is the one that's kind of attaining the most amount.
Yes, and you can add to these others as you go. I mean, I do think it's worthwhile channeling all your energy and passion into the project that gives you the most, the most excitement. You can't really spread yourself too thinly,
No, you can't.
but you can add to it. So I have, and I think there's Eimear McBride who said something along the lines of, writing should almost feel like an affair. So if you're writing, like you could have, you could have multiple, liaisons with lots of different things. And I think that is, so I have lots of those projects, and lots of projects which sort of which was this novel in its beginning form, having kind of not worked or become something else. They kind of separated off, and they're sort of sitting there. And in fact, I found a novel that I forgot I'd written, which isn't that bad. There's lots in it, so I'm very, very excited to return to that. It's like 100,000 words of stuff.
Forgot that you'd written 100,000 words.
Yep. But that's an example of just how focused you are on the current project. Because for me, when at the time I was like, well, this isn't writing. This is an absolute mess. What am I doing? I'll write properly, and and I wrote my novel, and I went back into it, I'm like, but there's a story in this. Like, oh my God.
Well, this is really important. I think this is the thing. There is no wasted material.
No.
Is there? And I think people made it despondent. Like, it took me a good few novels to get to the point where it was a crap, and I could do something with it. But that doesn't mean to say that that was wasted time, because I was learning. But also a lot of the ideas in there, that's
recycle
we pilfer from ourselves.
Do.
You bring it out, and definitely. I'm sure there was something in, I can't remember what it was, but in the book that I've got out, it's not out on submission at the moment. It's called The Last Man in Paris, and there was something in there that I'd taken from like a short story that I'd written years and years ago. But it's one of those things that sits on in a folder, and you think, there's a couple of good little bits in there.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. There should be no shame in that.
No shame,
as long as it's your own work that you're taking.
Oh wait, what? So where did your fascination for, like, we're both English novelists. Both of our debuts were set in America.
Well, yeah.
Where has this fascination for America come from?
I was born there.
You were born there. I did know that. I'm sorry.
So no. But it's we moved when I was about 4, I think. So I don't really have memories of it other than very kind of visceral and powerful. When I went back I went back as an adult to America, having not been there for a long time. And as soon as I switched on a light switch, and how there's like the chunky ones that you hold, they're not yes. It was like an out of body experience. It was like, suddenly, because my first experiences were in an American house, the first voices I would have heard would have been American accents, and in fact, my 2 older sisters and I had American accents. So the language was in me first, the language. This sounds like it's really exotic.
The 10-year-old kid that grew up in the 80s suddenly went, when you said, I grew up with an American accent, I thought, that's so cool.
No, but exactly. No, but also, I think we're similar in this way because we're of a similar age, and we have sort of a similar nostalgia for American culture, that kind of E.T., Stand By Me, all that kind of stuff. But also, but it's that. So for me, so it's kind of spooky in that way, but also it's the way that I have been taught to kind of define myself. Like my family, like my dad always made a big thing about how, like, well, you were born in America, and I was like, and I have 3 sisters, so any way you can distinguish yourself from the rest of them, they're all born in England. You were born in Liverpool, that's boring. So that it became sort of like this feature. But also, American culture is, it's a storytelling culture. That is predominantly the books I was reading, the films I was watching, the music I was listening to, and that's always been true. But that's true. It's not like an exotic, profound idea. This is true for lots of people.
Absolutely,
lots of people who have no connection with the States.
America's cool.
Well, no, and you can't get over it. Even if you think one is high-minded, British, above coolness. We don't need to be cool. As soon as you go to like New York, you're like, oh man, it's so cool. Even it smells gross, and I feel cool just being gross. It's great.
I've got 2 versions of New York in my head. I've got the movie version, which is pieced together from countless movies, and then the actual. When I was there, I was like, oh, it fits together like this. It fits together.
It's not but also kind of, if the contrast is what is interesting. So the fact that there are so many narratives running at once, and so for me, the interest of this idea of that sort of the Oregon Trail, which is the founding story of America, supposedly is a story, and it's history, but it's also based on a false premise that the land was wilderness and it was uninhabited as well. But the fact that is in a way undermines it. It doesn't. It builds. It's the same beast you're talking about. So I find it fascinating, and I find it really interesting to think about. There's a real sense as well of history as story in America in a way that's sort of kind of true to British culture as well, but in America that is the story of how it came to be. All of this, the narratives are built there from the beginning, and there's an awful lot of violence there as well, and all these, it's very, the stakes are high, but also the history hasn't gone, the sorts of history I've been reading about in terms of land theft in the 19th century, it's still happening, it hasn't gone away. So there's a direct link through the history and story. So that's what is interesting. But certainly the reason why, I think, is because I was born there, and I felt that made me special, and that there's always had this connection.
You are special.
Oh, I know. Lots of ways, but
that's a great thing. You're right. That's a great. I don't have that because I was born in England. So
where's yours come from?
That's an excellent question. I don't know, I've talked about this with my brother in particular, who's a couple of years younger than me, and because we would reference certain, I say cultural things, but they would be movies or TV shows and stuff that we watched as kids and everything. And for sort of my love of the American South, for instance, it has been drawn for things that we watched as kids. Yeah. You know, and then my kind of being drawn to the American West, if you think about, you know, Westerns, you think about cowboys, you think about that through to things like, you know, Han Solo was a cowboy. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But all of that is part of this, how we feed our imaginations, and once you find kind of the cauldron that has that for you, it gives you everything.
Well, so the astronauts and the test pilots from my novel are drawn kind of directly from those archetypes of the cowboy, you know. Yeah. But they were cowboys in spacesuits, effectively. So you can draw very clearly that line.
There's also an advantage to as well writing about things that you have connections to, but that are not directly in your life. So I wrote the novel about New York, predominantly in Edinburgh and Cornwall, actually. So it wasn't there, but actually there's something about the looking at something from a distance, which gives you perspective, gives you a frame. It allows you to. So it's clearly important to have experience of some kind to try and, you know, make something of that. And for me, the challenge has been to write about landscape that I don't have access to. But of course, there are other resources you can use. But certainly that distance can be useful. It gives you a different perspective.
It absolutely does. And I think you're right. And it can be a great advantage. And I'm really glad that you said that thing about, you know, the perspective and the distance and to be somewhere and looking out to another. Because there's this kind of long running joke that I had that I flunked my English A-level, which I did. I got a D in my English A-level. And I remember when the last pilot came out, there was a local press story about it, which is great. And, you know, it's brilliant. I believe the headline was something like local...
From D to debut or something.
No, it was worse than that. Something about flunking his A-level proves he's got the right stuff now, or something like that, which is great. So, and I'm really, in some ways, proud of it, because it doesn't, you say to people, it doesn't define what you then become.
Oh, God, no. A-levels, you just get through them.
Well, what I didn't realise until and it was friend Sarah Perry who said this to me, is I had said I flunked it, but I think I got a bit too creative in my essay on The Tempest. Right, I got a bit too, because I remember talking about people loving being in one place and looking out at another, and I remember talking about beach huts and stuff. I can't even remember. It was this whole thing. But I didn't realise at the time that actually when they're marking A-level essays, they're just ticking off things that you're supposed to do. And Sarah was like, that sounds more like an Oxford thesis or something like that. Well, but thank you.
But also this idea of sort of education can do this, and this is my experience at university. Although I very much enjoyed university, it gave me a lot that I'm very grateful for. But certainly it's a very confusing time if actually what you're wanting to do is not really to kind of look back and define. You want to create. And I'm not saying that, say, literary criticism isn't a form of creation, because of course it is, but there's a different part of your brain that you're using, I think. And that was always my trouble. I've always loved history. It's always my favourite subject, and I wanted to do it at university, but every qualification I did, I got increasingly worse at the exams, because I didn't understand how you were supposed to do it. So I love the history, I love the facts, I love the sort of imagining of it. I love the idea that you could take these ideas and talk about them and discuss them, but actually they didn't want that. They wanted reference to sources.
Exactly.
And when I realised actually that writing gives you the freedom to roam in an imaginative and sometimes intellectual way, completely through your own guidance and in the guidance of others, it gives you such freedom to do that without you having to refer back necessarily, or without having to bow down to sources or hierarchy in that way. Absolutely. And I love that. That's what I love about it. So for me, and I remember loving writing stories in history, because my wonderful history teacher, Mr. Ian Hind, who I've met recently, would let me write stories instead of essays, and I was like, well, this is what I want to do. But so I have found this is what I've always wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, history is stories. I mean, it comes from Histoire French, is telling stories, doesn't it? Something like that.
Right. I'm not going to go there yet. I didn't do too well in French. That's okay.
No, absolutely. Well, Megan, this has been fun.
It's been really fun.
We should do this all the time.
So lovely to see you, Ben.
It's nice to see you too.
A big thank you to Benjamin and Megan for their time. If you have any questions or you want to get in touch, you can find us at Writers Centre on Twitter and Instagram. We're on Facebook, and you can sign up to the regular NCW newsletter at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk. Did you know that we are a UK registered charity? Well, now you do. We rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation over on the website today by going to the Support Us page. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, please do consider subscribing to The Writing Life and leaving a 5-star rating and a review, because this helps other writers to find us. Thanks again, keep writing, and I'll catch you on the next episode.